Hi, my name is Patrick Vaughn. Welcome to Scratching the Surface. This is a series of open-ended conversations with a colleague. The two of us are exploring race issues in our society today. I am a Presbyterian minister, and this is Terrell Carter. Terrell, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I am a Baptist pastor in St. Louis, Missouri. I also work full-time in higher education, and I'm a former police officer for the city of St. Louis.
This is the second video in the series that we are recording. Last week we recorded one, and after I went back and watched it, I wasn't comfortable with it, and I asked you if you wanted to record it over. I was very glad to do that, but you didn't want to. My discomfort was centered in, if you looked at the last video, the way the cameras were angled, you were here, but I was here. And even though that wasn't intentional, it seemed to me to subtly communicate a superior position, a white superior position. You didn't take it that way, though. What was your response?
I didn't see it that way at all. I just saw it as two camera views based on how we had our computers sitting. I didn't see any kind of hierarchy or position of power, but I also know you and we are friends, so I would not see it that way in the first place.
Could you share some of the subtle ways you experience racism in our society? There's so many. There's so many.
Thank you. There's just the way that people respond when I walk into the room. There's the way that people respond when they see me at the gas station. I walked into a store today, and I work in a primarily white town, and I'm not being disrespectful to the town because there are wonderful people there. And I wore this to work today. So I have on a bow tie. Who's a threat wearing a bow tie? But I got out of my car, walked up to the door, and a woman, an older woman, came out, and I spoke to her and said, good afternoon, ma'am, how are you doing? And she looked at me with a look of disgust and rushed to her car. Maybe she was just having a bad day. But the look was so familiar that I think I know what that look was about.
You've seen that look many times.
Yep.
Paul Butler is a professor at Georgetown University. He wrote an article with this quote, and it fits right into what you're talking about now. He says, "The sight of an unknown black man scares people, and the law responds with a set of harsh practices of surveillance, control, and punishment designed to put down the threat."
I agree with that quote, and I've written things like that myself. I think we may have talked about it a little bit last week, but I always hate to refer to a book that I've written, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and trying to say this clearly. In my book, Police on a Pedestal, Responsible Policing in a Culture of Worship, the thesis of the book is that there is a story being told about black people, and it primarily revolves around criminality, that a black person should be expected to be this way, and it's hard to break people's mindset about that thinking or about that story that has been told about black people for so long.
Who's telling the story?
There are multiple people telling the story. There are police officers telling the story, and the second part of the thesis is based on who's telling the story, let you know why and what they are hoping to gain. So police are telling the story. The criminal justice system tells the story. Media tells the story. Citizens tell the story as well. And our courts, again, part of the criminal justice system, tell the story.
And the basic story is black males are a threat?
Black males are a threat that need to be controlled from police and from politicians was the other group that I left off. Mm-hmm. This group of people are a danger, and you as a white citizen shouldn't have to worry about them. So entrust someone else to take care of it for you. And if you do that, we'll make sure that they're taken care of and that you're safe and that you don't have to look over your shoulder. You don't have to worry about your wife when she's going out late. You don't have to worry about your daughter bringing one of them home. We will keep you safe. And the media plays into that, and the stories that they continue to tell, how they describe. When a person commits a crime, if it's a white person, that story is told in a very particular way. It's told with a certain level of compassion versus a certain level of aggression and fear when it relates to a black person doing the same thing. That's just one example.
And you find that consistently?
Oh, it is consistent. There have been multiple studies that have shown that, again, when African Americans are shown on the news, there's about an 80% chance that it's going to be in a negative light. And whites only face that about 30% of the time. So if a black person is shown on the news, let's even think about it this way. When certain crimes are committed or when certain things happen, African Americans are always or primarily shown in a negative way, always the worst pictures, the pictures that show them in an inhumane way. And when someone like Dylan Roof goes and kills someone, they are talked about in ways of, no, he has a mental health problem. He has a mental health concern.
We can understand that.
Right.
Rather than describing it in terms of evil.
Right.
How do we tell a different story?
I'm sorry for the big, long, dramatic pause, but
These are big questions. I understand, and that's why we're calling it scratching the surface. But I think that it's just so important.
Well, it's also because we are having the same conversation that we had 4 years ago. We are having the same conversation we had 4 years ago, and then we had the same conversation how many years before that when Rodney King was stopped and beaten on camera in Los Angeles, or we can name when Emmett Till, when his bruised, broken body was shown on the front of newspapers. We are still having the same conversation. So how do we start having a different conversation? We start holding people accountable, number one, for their participation in the story that's being told. Now, that's starting to happen with police departments. One of the ironies is what happened last night or just a few days ago. Another black male was shot and killed in Atlanta. And it's a slightly different circumstance. But the law enforcement community is being called into account. Now, the question becomes, does this only last for the next week, for the next month, for the next 6 months, for the next year? I think, unfortunately, it's going to last until the next big distraction comes along. We forget all about this. So, number one, start holding the people who participate in the conversation accountable.
Okay.
But number two, start holding ourselves accountable for how we want to be made comfortable, how we want someone else to protect us, how we want someone else to take care of our problems instead of us being willing to face that. I hope that that's clear enough. I need to explain it a little more. What I mean is, it's easy to, and I'm not dogging someone just because they live out in the county or they live a nice life. I don't live a bad life. But what I mean is, life is not just about your comfort and your security. I preached a sermon yesterday in church from Matthew chapter 9 and the beginning of chapter 10. The idea that we have been given a legacy as Christians. Jesus showed us what life was supposed to be like. We are to live and embody the gospel, that God wants people to be restored, that relationships should be rebuilt, that the sick should be healed, that the poor should be fed, that the imprisoned should be set free, that widows and orphans should be taken care of and provided. Unfortunately, to us in the 21st century, the gospel is, I want to go to heaven, number one.
Yes.
And number two, I want God to take care and give me the winning lottery ticket. That's what the gospel has turned into. And so because both of us are clearly pastors and Christians, that has to be at the very top of this. Whatever it is we decide we're going to do, we have to return to this idea that our salvation means something in our lives, and it's not just about our comfort, but it is about seeing people as created in God's image and doing something to make sure that that image is affirmed, whether it's white, black, male, female, or anything else.
How do you see the white church colluding with the story you described a minute ago?
So again, I'm about to refer to another book. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You mentioned it last week, the Ten Commandments for Good Negroes. Again, that book was written in response to white Christians saying, why can't black folks just get along? Why can't they do what they're told? Why are they always so angry? Well, because of how they have been treated historically, because of the DNA of racism that is in our nation, that is in the founding of our nation, that is still in some of the laws that we have that we follow in our nation. That is part of who we are, and yet we want to overlook it. So part of my thinking, or what I'm trying to express, is that, again, the church has become comfortable, and we understand that God is here to make us happy. What is that old saying that Jesus didn't come to, he came to comfort the afflicted and to
afflict the comfortable.
There you go. That is how the church is complicit. We would rather be we would rather be comfortable living in the world that is safe and free to us, while other people stand on the outskirts. And if I'm not mistaken, that man named Jesus went to all the people that were on the outskirts instead of to those who
on the margins.
There you go.
Yeah, on the margins. That's a lot to take in, isn't it?
But it's, unfortunately for me, it's something that I think about almost a daily basis. And I can't begin to write a sermon without that at the foundation, that this is not about how is the church complicit. We're complicit in the fact that we would rather spend millions of dollars on a building and find pride in that instead of taking that $1 million and doing something for the community in which we exist and live. And I want to make sure that nobody thinks that I'm just saying that it's horrible to build buildings. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, what is the priority? It's a priority to build or buy a building so we can get 300 new members or 600 new members, or is the priority to go out and make a difference in the world, as Jesus clearly showed? Jesus did not have a building that he sent. They clearly went to the temple and the synagogue, but his ministry was in the streets with the people on a daily basis. And that goes completely against the vast majority of things that we understand about ministry and our faith today.
You've done a nice job of describing two of the caricatures of Christianity in the United States today. One is the prosperity gospel, and the other is, I got to go to heaven. This is what church is all about.
Yep.
And that takes our attention away from what's going on right here in our community and our relationships with other people, particularly those who are different from us.
Yes.
And the challenge you're saying is that we need to learn to tell another story.
Yes.
Against the backdrop of those caricatures, then, I'm wondering, how does Jesus' suffering, the cross, fit in? How does that help us, guide us, shape us to move towards greater racial equality and justice in our society?
So if this faith that we claim is true, which I think both of us do, if this faith that we claim to follow is true, then what God did through a particular man, a particular person, was not just for one group. That was part of the challenge that Jesus' original disciples faced, was believing that it was all about them and only for them. And God took great pains to show them that there was more to the world, more to God's kingdom than they ever expected. So people who they thought were dogs actually were their brothers and sisters. Yep. People who they believed were on the margins or outcast actually were the same. They exhibited the same gifts and the same calling that they did. So God took great pains to show them that, no, this world that I have developed, I've created, I've made, whatever the proper phrase is much bigger than any of us anticipate. And we are called to act on behalf of the building of that world, the building of that kingdom.
You mentioned how we've had these situations before. Rodney King, time goes by. Another murder of a young black man, protest, time goes by, again and again and again. And that's a powerful narrative in our culture. What is it going to take to penetrate the armor of that narrative? Because I think the defense of that narrative is very, very strong. And there are those, I think maybe many of those in our society that are threatened by changing that narrative. I think because it would mean a change in their power, a change in their political situation, a change in their economic situation. So with those forces and the repeated disappointments that we've had, what's going to help us get through the armor?
One is perseverance in time. I agree with the things that you just said. I usually say that I hold out more hope for my daughter's generation. My daughter's 15. I hold out more hope for my daughter's generation because they have been raised in a much more intentional way with the opportunity to see more people who are different from them, not just race and ethnicity, but religion-wise. Two of my daughter's best friends are Muslim. They follow Islam, and she could care less. And truthfully, I could care less. I'm not threatened, and I don't believe that she should feel threatened by having people in her life that are different from them. And actually, I think that it is an extremely good thing that she learns and grows in that way. But number one, I think part of it is going to be time. I hate to say it this way, or I hope this comes across in the way that I'm intending, but time for some of these impediments to die off. Now, clearly, we will never get rid of racism. We will never get rid of classism. We will never get rid of sexism. But those who are the bastions of those types of movements, those type of ideas, hopefully more of them will die off sooner than later. Again, I'm not looking forward to anyone dying, but those ideas begin to die, and that this new generation or newer generations are rising up and begin to replace them.
I'm encouraged by that too, that the attitudes do seem to be changing for the succeeding generations.
One of the things people always say is, let's change the laws. Unfortunately, the laws can be used. I agree, we do need to change laws. Let me make sure I say that correctly. Laws do need to be changed. The challenge is, as part of this storytelling process, you can make any law, almost any law, say what you want it to say, or you can always begin to change the story so you get to change that law all over again. So I don't always put my hope and trust only in changing laws. I believe that primarily we need to change people, change their hearts, change their ways of thinking.
On that note, we can wrap up. What I would like to do next time is pick up on this conversation about changing hearts and what's involved in changing hearts. I think that's a crucial point of this, and it's been important for my journey, and I'll talk a little bit more about that next time too. For those of you watching, thank you so much for joining us. Again, my name is Patrick Vaughn, and this is
Scratching the Surface. Thank you.
With Terrell Carter. Thank you. Take care.